And Pimm, that's the difference, because you and I met on air on a TV spot,
Yes.
and
Yes,
you wanted
exactly.
to interview me again because I didn't have that observing ego that told me what not to say.
Yeah, kind of. We always appreciate people that
Maybe
are
not.
willing
I don't
to
know.
say what's on their mind, and also
It's tough,
people
but it's very
that-
clear.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah, well,
with
that's
the
right.
traditional ship owner.
Am I missing something? Is there someone else? Well, it's my alter ego, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in the radio and TV business, you do have to be adept at listening to two things at the same time and pretend to care about both of them.
Sort of like being married.
Not going there. Yeah.
It's
Are you going to tell people, one of the things we talked about, and Simon and I, just to kind of give you the background, when we first met, as Simon said, he came on Bloomberg, and I think was probably the first person really that we had to talk about the world of shipping, right? It was kind of an odd thing. I mean, because at least for the media, well, it's that old joke, right? And the storm passed safely out to sea. If we don't see it, if it's not in front of our faces, we don't really care about it that much. And Simon told interesting stories about the business, and of course it coincided with a lot of initial public offerings, which was also a news item. And we became friendly. And so, you know, before you ask me a question, I want to ask you a question because, as John was just saying, investment banker, and now in the role of investor relations and communications, people go, well, one is, yeah, I get the value of one, but you don't have to convince us in the media about the value of communications. That's a done deal. But what was the switch all about, or the transition?
That's an interesting question. Thank you.
Can we move you guys over one chair just so you can all appreciate
Yes.
The beauty and the splendor.
See, well, I was in the interviewer chair, so, you know, they don't want me to take that away from you. So I was already doing it. Yeah. So how did you? Oh, it's warm already. Good.
And mine is very cold.
Yeah, well, you know. But I mean, yeah, how was that transition?
When we founded Dahlman Rose, there was an opportunity. Every newspaper and magazine, the front cover was BRIC, B-R-I-C,
Right.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and I think there were 4, maybe 5 public companies in the United States in the shipping industry. And when I exited in 2010, I think there were sort of around 50 maritime companies listed. And coming public is sort of like taking your baby home for the first time. It's exciting, big moment. You press the buzzer, the bell goes off. It's like taking the baby home. You take the baby home and you look at it and you try to figure out where the instructions are.
And you can't give it back.
And you can't give it back. And being a public company is not dissimilar, because all of a sudden the phalanx of Wall Street professionals and lawyers and accountants and investment bankers and capital markets teams and rushing you around the world on a private jet is over, and now you have this initial group of shareholders that, oddly enough, aren't there for life, and you have to communicate with a shareholder base, and you have to communicate with your existing shareholders, and you have to communicate with new potential shareholders, because if you don't have more buyers than sellers, your stock plummets. And most B2B companies, most shipping companies, they might have 10 important relationships. If you're in the container business, you have 3 important relationships. And they're not used to more of a B2C model where they're communicating and marketing to a wider audience. And investors are far more like consumers than they are other businesses. So the opportunity for us is to help the industry continue to tell their story, continue to bring capital into the industry, and help raise these babies. We're the nanny.
The nanny.
So.
Well, what I was going to say, and I beg your pardon, was to ask you what is surprising to people in the media, I guess, is that so many companies, and not every company, because there are a lot of companies that do a really, I mean, the companies that you read about every day, they do a really great job. What they do is they treat their shareholders the same way they treat their largest customers or
Yes.
vendors.
Yes.
And there's no real distinction. So whether it's sugar water like Coca-Cola, or whether it's an online service like Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, or an eyeglass company, we always assume that, well, yeah, that is the most important thing. I mean, we always look at Betamax and VHF and go, well, it doesn't really matter. It's not about what's true. It's about what people believe. And those are wildly disparate things. Is that something that you were surprised about, too?
You know, as a child, I grew up with a magnet on a refrigerator, and it said, if you think you know all the answers, you probably don't know all the questions. And I think that, you know, we're talking about wildly successful people, private companies that come public, and they know everything about running a shipping company. And being a public shipping company is a little differentiated, and it takes a little time, and then you say, wow, this is a whole nother animal. And at that point in time, they come to an epiphany where they either need help or they just languish. But if I read the syllabus correct,
Yes.
I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
Yeah, but you see, you know, the more airtime I take up, the closer I get to the commercial, and then, you know, we take a break. No, but I would just, before you get into this, I was just going to say, you know, in many instances, and I moderated a variety of panels and recently did one about emerging markets and Africa and so on. By all means, use your electronic device. Twitter, tweet, you know, whatever you guys want to do. I was trying to set up an online poll, and just before we get started, can I just make a poll of hands? Because
Sure.
I'm curious to know how many people in here, let's say, are ship owners, just so I can get an idea. All right. So these are the whales, and everybody else is kind of the guppy. All right. Or somehow related. Now you're in the shipping services or finance or so on. Okay, thank you.
How many in the audience are shipping investors?
Well, you're evenly matched. You got,
I think we have one-on-one.
yeah. We got it. Well, and almost enough for an NBA team, but that's another story. All right, go ahead. What do you want to know?
So you're in the news business,
Yes.
and I think it's a generally accepted notion that publicity and creating an image in the media is an important
It's the only thing that matters.
In terms
We have
of-
this presidential election, by the way, right? And, I mean, let's just be honest here. That's all about publicity, celebrity, entertainment. I mean, there's no there. It's just what you read and see and hear. So it's about, you know, that.
So perception might be the extreme of perception, right? And most investors are at least tethered in some way to numbers, but I agree that there's a nuance to it. What makes a story? What makes a story that you want to have on television or radio or in print?
Well, there are a couple different kinds of stories, really. I mean, there's the story that you want to tell about yourself, about your own company. Well, I'll give a very concrete example. I was speaking with a gentleman last night who is in the shipping industry, and he started telling me a story about how he became interested in the business, and it had to do with a member of his family, but he built it himself, and it was also a kind of a happenstance story. And people tell stories, right? Ships don't tell stories, airplanes don't tell stories. People tell stories. It's much easier, and by the way, just quickly, you know those three definitions of a story is, you know, like a batter and a pitcher and a catcher and an umpire, right? And the umpire says, well, I call them like I see them, and another umpire says, I call them the way they are.
Pimm, this is a largely European crowd.
They'll get this.
Okay.
They'll get this. Or you can even do it with football, right? And the last umpire says, they ain't nothing until I call them. So my point is that it's nothing unless the press or the media or the customer, right? Because now the media is fractured, the story is nothing. I can guarantee you 100% failure if you tell no story. Right? You have to tell a story. First of all, the idea is you have to exist. You have to let people know that you live and breathe whatever business and industry, in this case, shipping and logistics. You guys live and breathe it, men and women, every day doing their thing. I guarantee you, if I walked through my newsroom and I asked everybody to name one shipping company, they could not do it. Not because they're dumb, but because there is nothing in front of them, either visual, video, written, and it has to be consistent. You know, it has to be a message that you feel authentically capable of committing to. When we were coming over here, I was kind of joking, but not really. I was curious to know how many people in the audience are wearing a tie that has the emblem of their company. Now, I've been to Ferrari meetings, and every Ferrari executive wears a Ferrari tie. I was at the Detroit Auto Show. It's part of their blood.
Same thing with Hermes, by the way.
Hermes, okay, well, I would imagine that to be the case. But I would ditch all the Hermes ties or get them to make them for your... My point being that what makes a story first is the person. You need to be able to tell a personal story. Now, whether that turns into a 3-minute video, an interview, a piece in a magazine, maybe you have a hobby about something, whatever it is, but it has to be about you. If the commitment doesn't come from the top, it's never going to get done. And what makes a good story, of course, what we like as a good story is stuff that other people do not know. So, for example, exclusives and so on. Yes, and I'll give you some details about when those should be released and how to do that. I mean, there's some very tactical issues. But as far as a story goes, you need to have a person. Something needs to have happened. Or you have an expert in a field that is capable of commenting on a particular topic or issue. And I understand that, you know, people are focused on numbers. Is it good? Is it bad? We'll focus on that, but what we're focusing on is the market's reaction to that. Right? So if the stock, Adobe, I think, reported yesterday, the results were pretty good. The headline on the release was record revenues, and so on and so on. Stock was down about 2% in after-hours trading. It turned out because they had an unrecognized or they had an undisclosed or something, a pension cost of some kind. And the stock was down. Now, does that make Adobe a bad story? No. But if Adobe is smart, they're going to get out front of the story and they're going to tell people about their new creative suite. You have to be out there telling the story actively, and that's not just putting it on Business Wire or PR Wire or whatever it is, because nobody there cares. So you need to craft a story, and really it has to be about a person. It has to have a specific point. And don't tell me something that I already know. Right? The other thing we were talking about is, okay, you look up a stock online and you think maybe you'll do a story because you got a pitch from a PR company, and you look and you see, well, okay, maybe it's an $800 or $900 million market cap company, so you dig a little deeper, you look at the chart, and you see it like this, and you realize, well, what's the story?
When you look at a company, what's the first thing you do? How do you research a company?
Well, a lot of it depends, obviously, if I know about the company, but most of all, what I'm going to do is go to their company website. If your company website looks under construction, I got 50 other websites I can go to that aren't under construction. You're not competing against other shipbuilding or logistics companies. You're competing against every company because I got a choice of what I can select. And I'm going to select the one that is the path of least resistance, at least in terms of being able to communicate effectively. So, for example, you need high-quality video. What do? I want to know how to contact people. Is there a press contact? Will they get back to me? Is there a list of previous stories, good and bad, about the company so that it demonstrates that you as a corporate entity are willing to be transparent about what the public already knows? And there needs to be a message on the website. And personally, I would recommend in this age where you probably have all been at least multitasking while we're talking, right? I mean, I would imagine most of you are either tapping, talking, typing, or something. But it needs to change. You can't have the same website. If I go to the website this quarter and it's the same as it was last quarter, click. Why? You know, if you get a choice to write, I mean, it's very easy because let's say at the end of the day I have the choice to do story A, B, and C. Now, I'm lucky because I don't have to just focus, let's say, on the shipping industry. Obviously, shipping reporters will have to do that. But if I have a choice and it's between, you know, Worlds of Warcraft, Adobe, and a shipping story, you're going to say, well, he's always going to pick Worlds of Warcraft. Not true. But if it's a compelling video, if it is something, I don't know, the Panama Canal is opening next
Sunday.
week, right? The June the 26th. There was a front page story in the New York Times. I don't think we got one pitch from one. I think the only pitch we've gotten is, yeah, well, okay, besides you. But and still, it's a challenge to get people to come through, right? I mean, everyone thinks, well, would you like to put a camera on a ship going through the Panama Canal? Yes. I mean, you know, take yes for an answer. Yes. What's the next step? Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, okay, click. I got to go to someone that doesn't say, I don't know. I got to go to someone that says, well, you know, they're flying some solar plane and it's taking off from Kennedy at 4 in the morning. You want a live shot of that? Oh, yeah, we'll drive the truck out there and do that. That's what we do. But so those kinds of stories are useful. Just even elegant B-roll, comprehensible B-roll.
When you have a guest on the show, what do you ask them for before you interview them?
Well, typically, I personally want a bio, and I want to know the 3 things that they want to get across. What is it that you want to let people know? Don't overcomplicate things. You know, people have a 5-minute attention span.
Is it helpful if they have a reel of some
Yeah,
sort?
B-roll. That's what I mean, B-roll. And that
Explain
means
what-
B-roll. B-roll is, so for example, let's say you're watching 60 Minutes, right? And there's an interview, and you're hearing someone's voice talking about a Tesla automobile. We were talking about electric cars earlier today. That video that you see, now maybe CBS, because they're in the business of spending money for this kind of thing, they will go and shoot their own video. But most places won't. There's no need to. Why would they? The companies supply it. You know, it's like advertising. Then we can talk about native advertising in a second. But that is called B-roll. And that just rolls and rolls, and, you know, that gets filed away.
So
And
for a
it might-
shipping company, it could be a ship at sea or...
Oh, yeah, and movement. You know, it's not, whoops, I beg your pardon. It's not intellectual. This is all about the eye, you know, your eye movement, right? The movement of your retina. Because one of the things that happens is if I sort of dance things or make things twinkle in front of you, you're going to watch it. And that's much more compelling than watching, I'll just be blunt about it, you know, an older white dude talk about his company. It's just, and there's nothing wrong, you can have both. But while he's answering the questions or she's answering the questions, you want some captivating imagery. I mean, most people in the world are never going to experience the fabulous thing that you guys do, which is you get to actually go on these ships. They're
Tim,
amazing.
We have 1 minute.
I beg your pardon. See,
That's okay.
That's why I took up the time at the beginning.
What is the... there's a collision in media right now between online, between broadcast, between cable, radio,
Podcasts. Yeah.
Facebook, Vine, et cetera.
Do it.
What's the collision about? What's important?
Well, it's about the thing that everybody has in their pocket. You're going to be running your company from a, it's the future, right? Everything that's in your pocket, you should be able to access from your pocket, right? I mean, I have in mind, I think I downloaded about 6 shipping apps that can tell me everything I think I need to know. And it's not about me, it's about, as I go back to that thing about perception. Because you're going to end up with someone who's under 40 years old who's going to get all their information from this little device, And that person is going to be a portfolio manager, and that person's going to want to like invest in this or that. But unless it's on your, on a device, so yes, you need to do that all. Facebook, everybody should have a well-run Facebook page. If, get an intern or someone who wants to do it, make it look great, put up video, events. One of the things that I always want to know is, are you going to be at a certain place at a certain time? Because maybe you're going to run into someone that is useful in your business. They're already doing that in the tech world. So you've got to be a tech, you've got to use all those tools. It's like saying you're going to run a company without using a pencil and a paper 100 years ago. Who's going to do that?
Right.
Does that work?
I think that works.
Does that work? Pencils, paper?
I like to draw the analogy. When I started my career, we were just getting used to things called the fax machine.
Fax machine.
And then we had an intranet.
Heard about that, yes. Didn't Al Gore invent that?
No, that was the internet. This was
beg
the
your pardon.
intranet, and it was within American Express, and we had email within American Express that they
Yes.
would push at you. And then we got email, and then we got internet. And in the financial services business, our clients used to call in from the road and say, hey, where's such and such trading? And they had no other access to information. Then the internet came, and they could get live quotes over the internet of
Using
where stocks
Bloomberg.
were trading.
Yeah.
For the fortunate few.
Yes.
And then there was online brokerage where they could buy and sell
Right.
online. And now most of the decisions are made online.
Well, you've just described what's happened to the investment business where it's collapsed the distance between the corporate entity, the B2B. There's no more B2B. Tell that to a company that, I don't know, I'm thinking, for example, companies like Volkswagen. They're just having their annual meeting. Why are they having that annual meeting? Is because they did something really, really wrong. And maybe they thought they could get away with it, but the damage is incalculable.
Yeah.
And that happens, why? Because someone leaked that information. So, yeah, video, Facebook, our time is up. I know. Okay.